Oh, baby, baby.
All right. Hello, listeners. It's your boy, NotoriousSA, a.k.a. Steve Anderson, a.k.a. Mr. On Fire, because I have one of the most popular guests around. For those of you who don't know, I've been reading some recent articles, and this one came out, a couple that have come out, which will all be linked in the description of the episode, about this woman, Amanda Moore, who spent 11 months undercover in the MAGA movement and learned quite a bit about the most influential players in our party, at least on the youth side. And, you know, the story is really compelling, and I wanted to bring her on. And luckily, she was able to find time to talk to me. So without further wasting time, I'd like to introduce everyone, Amanda Moore. And Amanda, would you like to tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am, well, what kind of stuff do you want to know? Hold on.
Whatever you want to say, by all means, go ahead.
So my life story, long background. I'm a former libertarian turned lefter than Bernie person. So probably not quite on par with the people that are listening right now. I have, for many, many years, I worked in live events. I worked trade shows. And of course, during the pandemic, that was not really happening anymore. And I'd always kind of wanted to be a writer. So I figured I would go to some Trump rallies and write up little blog posts about them or something and see what happened. And of course, that led us to where we are today, which is here talking to each other.
Wonderful. It's amazing how life's crazy trajectory can lead you to talk to some of the most interesting people. So, and that's where I wanted to start. The first thing I wanted to mention was I want to kind of go into the background of how this whole process started for you. So it sounds like, so yeah, basically when the pandemic initially starts, right, your work is cut off. I read in the Nation piece that you had suicidal ideation. You were struggling to find funds. And, you know, I've been there. I know it's a dark place to be at. And a lot of people can also relate to that. You clearly weren't the only person in that time who felt that way, and you were able to find something to channel it into. So I guess my first question is, how are you feeling now? It's been quite the roller coaster for you since 2020.
Yeah, it is. You know, I was undercover from, I guess, November 2020 to October 2021, and I got doxxed, and I knew it was happening privately before anybody that was around me knew. I was getting emails with my full name and address. And I just remember like laying on the floor crying. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with my life now? This is my whole life. But you know, obviously now it's much better because I'm writing about it and talking about it. But it was really devastating to have this goal. And I almost made my goal. I thought I'm going to go to Turning Point USA in December 2021. And that'll be my last event because I'm going to run out of money. Mm-hmm. And just before that last event, I got cut off. And so also feeling like I was missing the goal and not accomplishing what I set out to do really sucked. But you know, now it's great. Now I get to argue with certain young Republicans on Twitter all day. And I get to write about them, and that's very fun for me. I do enjoy that.
Yeah, it's a full-time job, clearly. They keep bringing material, and you got to keep talking about it, so that's understandable. I wanted to ask, so when you made the decision to go undercover, and when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about when I read previous like stuff about Heath Ledger and James Gandolfini and Bryan Cranston, when they played like bad characters and roles, right? They're in a way they're kind of like being someone they're not, and they have to be that day in and day out and do it convincingly. And for a lot of them, it kind of messes with their brain because, like, you know, you have to kind of convince yourself in the moment that you believe these things to pass through. So like when you're with all these young men who are espousing some of like the worst things you've ever heard, right? You're just sitting there, and I know from reading that you kind of mentioned you basically suck it up and smile. What's it like to be in that mindset where you're putting on a face for everybody, but on the inside it's just kind of burning? What's it like to go through that?
Well, I worked trade shows, like I said, for over a decade, which is basically just a full-time job of people talking to you like you're a moron. So I was really good at kind of compartmentalizing that. I mean, I would just hear the most ridiculous stuff at work, sometimes the most insulting stuff at work, and I would just have to deal with it. And so It was like just a more racist version of that. Certainly not a more misogynistic version of that, because that was about equally on par. But I never, you know, like I never like it never bled into my real life in a way where it's like, oh, I feel like I'm becoming more racist or I'm becoming more, you know, misogynist or whatever. But what would be interesting is that when I would meet new people, I use my real first name Undercover, but I use my mother's maiden name as my last name. And I used a city that I used to live in. I used to live in Annapolis, Maryland, and I used that as my hometown. And sometimes when I would meet people, I would say the wrong name and I would say the wrong place that I was from. Like I would get the identities themselves, like the basic outlines, the identities confused, my real one and my fake one. But yeah, the more difficult stuff, I mean, I think that's probably why I was a good candidate to do this, because I'm very good at compartmentalizing. And so it was just very easy for me to kind of turn it on and off.
For sure. And I remember this for me, this is back in the day, my other political consulting. When I actually worked on the Democratic side, I was a tracker for the DCCC. You know what a tracker is? Have you heard of the job?
No.
Basically, they give you a camera and you're just supposed to follow people around all the time until they say something.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Oh yeah, it was super fun. So lots of good times. Well, and it was funny because I mean this is 2015, so I mean this might be like we said prehistoric now, but basically they gave me a fake Facebook account with a name. It was like George Smith or something like really basic, but it was a Republican Facebook account that was liked and into all of the local Facebook groups that were all Republicans in the area. So we were supposed to be able to use that to do surveillance on where they're going to be and what events they were going to. You know, I think when we all thought social media was a kind of still positive force that was going to do wonders in terms of connecting us. So yeah, I've been there for sure. And then on the doxing side, when I became a Republican and I worked on the last gubernatorial campaign in my state, I worked for this guy, Richard Irving, who was a mayor of a large city in our state. He was a Black Republican. And when my number got leaked for people that it was to call in case you wanted to volunteer with the campaign, some of them leaked my number, posted online, and encouraged them to say awful, terrible things to me. Which, you know, you get the basic, you're disgusting, I hate you, you're corrupt, and, you know, everything up to kill yourself repeatedly, which is, you know, super good for your mental health. So I know where you've been, and it's not great.
No, it's not fun, but it's crazy that they had you guys use your real numbers, like your own real personal phone number. That's wild.
It was like, it was like a Google number I had, but it was like my own kind of Google number, which I had used for previous political stuff. But yeah, it was still mine. And I was like, whatever, I didn't really care. I didn't think someone would go and post it on Facebook and say, hey, everybody, tell Steve what you really think of the campaign, and all the racist messages that would come after it. So that was not a great experience. But so as someone who, ironically, I work in this field and you're an undercover journalist in this field, and we're talking to the same people and have the same feelings about them. So that's why I find this so compelling. So diving a little bit more into the actual work that you did itself. So one of the things I was curious about, and I remember reading it somewhere, here it is, this is from that Mother Jones piece. But what if you weren't a journalist? Say if you had the skills of an amateur investigator and the ability to focus so deeply on a single subject that you almost lose yourself to it. If you had the time, the money, the resources, the desire, and general wherewithal, you could embed into something interesting. And during the pandemic, Amanda Moore found herself fitting the bill, which I feel is very compelling. It reminds me of a quote that I heard, I believe this is Andrew Breitbart, when smartphones came out. And he said, if you have a smartphone, you're a journalist now. And I find it interesting how you don't call yourself a journalist, but you basically went into this with, you know, what some of the most expert journalists in the past have ever done, which is have, you know, recording devices covertly placed and put on a face and being able to talk to people. It's really impressive. So was there anybody you drew inspiration from in terms of this? Like for other journalists who've done undercover work you looked at for inspiration, or you just sort of just, you know, go in without any forethought and said, I'm just going to, you know, throw it in, see what happens?
It's so funny. I really did not know what I was doing when I started. So I actually, you know, I just thought I was going to these rallies, and then January 6th happened. And then from January 6th, I was like, well, I'll go to CPAC. And while I was there, this guy recruited me into his organization, and that kind of, you know, made this happen. But it had not been my intention to be undercover in the manner that I was. But once I started reading the book. Oh God, I forget his last name, but he was a Mother Jones reporter and he worked in a prison. I bought his book and I read that and I was like, okay, if he can work in a prison, I could do this. I'm like, it would be nice if I had an outlet supporting me in some capacity, but prison seems way worse than this, you know?
No kidding, for sure.
But yeah, going in, I just, but I did have this background where I would go to a lot of protests and I would just kind of be there and record it. And I had a blog where I would write about it and I would try to like walk that line of like, if a protest was something that I supported, I still, I would sometimes take a sign and just do that. But usually I would try to kind of just be there to document it because a lot of these events would not have press. Like Black Lives Matter protests in 2014 did not have a lot of press at them. So I just wanted to kind of record things. And so I guess that is what I was planning to do, was the same kind of thing I'd done in the past, but in the past I'd done it for causes that I supported.
For sure. And so that does lead to my next question. So yeah, I remember reading in the mention in these articles that that's sort of when you started going to these things around that 2014, 2015 time. Looking back on that now, like obviously we can look back and then compare it to the 2020, summer of protests and see that it may have just been a precursor to it. Do you feel like many of the issues that you saw in these places were just on the forefront of being discovered by like the larger consciousness of the American public, or did you think it literally required something like 2020? Because I remember those 2014, 15 protests, and they were a big deal, right? When I was in school and I went to a smaller state school in Illinois with more conservative leading people, and it was a, hands up, don't shoot, more like pants up, don't loot kind of attitude. So for a lot of people, that was the prevailing, and I don't think it got, I thought in 2020 when it was clear that they were protesting for real valid reasons, like they're being murdered by police without accountability, you'd think you'd see a little bit more sympathy. But I feel like if anything, they've all kind of double and triple down on it. What do you think? Do you see any kind of difference when you look back from 2014 to now? Do you feel like we've made progress, or do you feel like we're still kind of in that same kind of dividing line?
It's so interesting. I mean, there's like 6 ways to answer this. I'm not sure which way you're asking, but I'm going to answer. When I saw Sephora in 2020, it was like Black Lives Matter. I'm like, I lost a huge contract in 2014 because I participated in a Black Lives Matter march. It was like, literally, some people would be like, "You're a terrorist," and and then it's just you have corporations being like, "Yeah, Black Lives Matter, whatever, who cares." What is going on?
It went from being radical to positive to just standard run of the mill.
Yeah, and I mean, in the aftermath of those marches, like there was a lot going on in Baltimore after Freddie Gray was murdered, and I would go up to court. Like the DOJ came, and obviously they like did their investigation into the Baltimore Police Department. They were like, "Wow, this is really messed up. This is a really messed up police department." But in the lead up to that, they would have all these community meetings, and I would go to them, and they would talk to people, and you would just hear horrific stuff. And at the federal courthouse, people would line up to see it, but they were all local, and it was all very strange because to me, it just felt like it wasn't really getting attention. Like you would get the big names of people who would be murdered, and Freddie Gray was one of those, and obviously Michael Brown, and then and the scattering around that, you would just have all these other cases that people wouldn't know about. And it felt like, it felt very frustrating. It was just, I couldn't understand. I was very into libertarianism at the time. It was a big part of my life. I was very active and I couldn't understand. I thought this was our whole deal, is that we're libertarians. We don't like the cops. So why are you guys not out here with me at these protests? I don't understand. And to see it go from something that was just weird to participate in to something that businesses were putting up on the side of their buildings was, it's still weird to me. And as far as people go, I mean, as I wrote about, the Young Republican National Federation just had their annual convention, and the guy who won chair, one of the biggest smear campaigns against him was he made a video after George Floyd died where he said, yeah, like not Black Lives Matter, the organization, but the idea that Black Lives Matter is a conservative ideal and the police probably shouldn't kill people. And it was a smear campaign that was used against him. So I think there's been some progress, but I don't know.
Right. It seems like in the larger society and as a whole among maybe, Democrats and Republicans and independent leaners who all saw that, everything you just said was like, yeah, totally understandable. I mean, Black Lives Matter, the organization that bought the mansion and whatever, is very different from the core concept that Black people's lives have been disproportionately hurt by the state through institutional racism and neo-slavery and all that other stuff, right? So like on the outside, the world is getting more tuned to it, but on the insular Republican world that I work in and you infiltrated, it's the opposite, right? Like it's a backlash almost, and being more racist and shocking is considered a plus. So, and I guess that will lead us into, so we'll actually get into your actual article then, the big thing that's come out, Undercover with the New Alt-Right. And then just real quick though, on a before side, on the libertarian thing, I did actually vote for Gary Johnson in 2016 as a way to maintain some Republican credibility without voting for Hillary Clinton. Although many of us did, and I probably should have in retrospect, but what's with the Libertarian Party, man? It's gone. I thought the GOP went off the rails, but the Libertarian Party's like, did a bunch of 12-year-olds just take over it? What happened?
Well, what's interesting is that one of the people that I write about in this article, Gavin Wax, I have all of his private chats from 2014 to 2017, and he originally had started a libertarian blog, and the ideal in these private chats was to take over the Libertarian Party because the GOP would be too difficult. And James Alsop, who is a noted neo-Nazi at this point, he was, in those chats with Wax. And yeah, it is. I think sometimes Republicans ask me, like, what's your deal? Like, why are you so invested in this? And I'm like, well, partially it's personal because these are just the guys I met when I was undercover. But partially it's like, I watched this happen in my party. I left in disgust. I voted for Beyonce in 2016 because my residency in Texas was challenged because of my involvement in the Libertarian Party. Like the GOP in Dallas would knock on doors, and if you didn't answer, they would dispute your residency, and they did it to me. So my vote, I know, didn't count, but I was kind of relieved because I was like, I don't really love Gary Johnson, but I'm never voting for Hillary Clinton. But yeah, I watched it happen in the Libertarian Party. They're lunatics. They're posting the 14 words on Twitter. They are out of their minds, and those are the same kinds of people that would like to do the same thing to the GOP.
I know. It's like the joke of 2015 and 2016 was that those things weren't funny. And it seems like a bunch of people didn't get the joke. And they became adults. They're like, yeah, just post it on Twitter. Why not, right? Make it the official party stance. That's totally fine. And other people who are like, what is wrong with you kids? It's not funny. It's just, I'm just amazed that, the fact that I look back and I voted on Libertarian, and I kept getting letters nonstop after that, and then they kept getting worse. It was like the one night stand I regret the most of anything in terms of my political allegiances. And I just thought I was so cool being like, Gary Johnson's a governor and Donald Trump is the worst person ever. Of course you guys should vote for him, and that didn't work out at all for me. So diving into your, I was very captivated by right at the beginning of your article when you say people in the political center and on the left tend to have a monolithic view of the far right. In reality, is an expansive ecosystem that includes neo-Nazis, Christian nationalists, conspiracy theorists, anti-government militias, and white nationalists. And I thought it was very true because, at least in the civilized world I live in, I don't necessarily have to see all these people all the time, but in the more offshoot version where some of these people have to go to get support, these people are here. And you think that Christians who go to church every day and neo-Nazis would not find themselves politically aligned. But in this particular version of the right, they have, because, it seems like the older churchgoers are convinced that the world's falling apart and Donald Trump's the only person that can save it. And the neo-Nazis are like, now is the time for us to install that racial order we've always wanted, because Donald Trump doesn't care about anything except himself. So we just say, hey, Donald, you're the best. By the way, can we have Nazi stuff? They'll be like, sure, whatever. You like it, right? It really amazes me that in the time that I've been involved with this, I've seen perfectly rational adults either lose their minds or give into stuff that I know they thought wasn't true, or become to believe that it's true. And I know in the same article you mentioned when you talk to some of these people and you go behind the scenes of these parties, there is no mask that comes off. It's all one and the same. So what's it like when you're talking to someone and I genuinely believe QAnon? Like, what goes through your mind? Is it any kind of sympathy a little bit? Do you feel like, depending on the person, do you know if they're easily, do you feel like they're easily persuadable, or if they're more of a huckster?
So something that's not in the article in The Nation is that I went to about 50% QAnon events and 50% fascist events, which were usually riding the coattails of mainstream GOP events. And it would be people who were older. It was exhausting. So I was raised evangelical. My dad still believes that his pastor raises people from the dead. It's very tiring. It's exhausting. Everything is, it's just a lot. Nothing can ever just be, right? Like, you can never just watch a movie. You can never just listen to a song. There's some conspiracy about it. In some way, it's satanic. I would listen to the QAnon people and the cadence in which they would speak and the things they would say. I would just like, oh, am I back? Am I 7? Am I back at Wednesday night, church? Like, I remember there was one thing in particular with masks, and it was like, the masks are full of poison. They are literally what's killing us. And this woman went on this rant about how she had tried to tell that to a guy who worked at a gas station in the middle of the night. She put his mask on when she came in. And she was like, he was really annoyed, but we have to tell people the truth. Even if they hate us, we have to save them. And I'm like, wow, if you just said save his soul, it would be literally the same as being told, you have to go preach all of the time. Even if people hate you, you have to save their souls. And it's a very same, kind of thing. And then she went on a rant about the Epigivenship and how it was a satanic drawing. And it was a sign to child traffickers and all of this stuff. And again, she's like, we have to tell people these things. We have to save them. And it's a lot. Obviously the people who are in charge of QAnon stuff are terrible people. They're running these conferences that are $1,000 a pop. They're like, crazy lunatics who are basically encouraging people to completely reject medicine. I would be at stuff and it would be like, if your kid breaks his leg, you really should reconsider taking them to the hospital because they might kill you with COVID at the hospital. Just completely deranged stuff. And it's like, I feel a great deal of sympathy for especially children of these people who are perhaps even in physical danger because of the paranoia and fear that has been instilled in their parents. But I also, it sucks. Like, it's a real bummer. My dad is one of these people. And, I have a real resentment for the people who help cook his brain. But I do generally feel bad for QAnon people. And there's also like this thing where, if you go to a QAnon event and you say, you guys think that Jews can ever be Americans? People are going to be like, what is wrong with you? Get out of here. Whereas if you go to a fascist event,
I read
say
that quote, and I was amazed that someone said that out loud. Just amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, fascist events, it's like a real topic of discussion,
Interesting. Do you feel like when you talk to these people, do you see a little bit of like your father or other family members in it who, like, somewhere in there's a person you could know and like be friends with, but like the things that they're saying are not something that you would ever want to ever associate with?
I find them less frustrating than I find my family, to be honest with you, because at the end of the day, I don't have to see them again. It's, I can have a conversation with these people, like, and I could undercover, have conversations the way that I just actually cannot do with my own family because, first, I'm not undercover with my family, but also, it's like I can turn it on for strangers in a way that I couldn't for my family. But yeah, I feel bad for the people who are swindled by the QAnon stuff.
For sure, it's caused money's lost, families have broken up. It's a real huge problem that it's almost like, we laugh at it as a joke, but it's like you see whole families get sucked into it. Like you say, children 7 or 8 spewing what their parents tell them to say, and they're saying things like Joe Biden's a pedophile, and it's like, you're a 7-year-old, you shouldn't even know what that means or have that word in your vocabulary, and yet the parents are like, no, you have to say the president of the United States is a pedophile in order for you to be my son. And it's like, I don't know what gets you to that point, and I feel really bad for a lot of these places that, or these people that do, because like, you know, it seemed like in the pre-pandemic, pre-Donald Trump world, it would have just been your average, maybe evangelical, slightly kooky family that, you know, maybe they didn't let their kids watch Harry Potter or something, but other than that, they were fine. And now it's like, don't put your kid in government schools, don't use vaccines, right? Don't trust anybody. Like, that is a massive break of trust in the matter of years, and it's very disturbing.
Yeah. I met a woman.
Go for it.
Oh, sorry. I met a woman and at a QAnon event, and she told me, she was like, yeah, I'm getting divorced from my husband. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. What's happening? And she goes, he doesn't believe that Trump won the presidency. He says that Biden won. And I was like, you're getting divorced? And she was not like a young woman. She was like, yeah, we've been married for like 30 years. I'm like, oh my God, like that is crazy. So yeah.
Breaking up a 30-year marriage, that's crazy. What's also crazy, leading back in, is one of the other things that stuck out to me was when you wrote, some of the neo-Nazis and fascists I met undercover in 2020 are working as congressional campaign staffers and helping to form congressional caucuses. So it's not like, you know, they're just trolls on the internet. They're in the halls of power with the party that's now currently in the majority of the House of Representatives. That is a terrifying thought, especially with Kevin McCarthy, who will literally give away anything to anyone to maintain the speakership. I'm very worried that these racists and there's like, you know, the congressmen who are idiots, whatever, but like they're smart social media racist staffers who are learning how the system works. That really scares me, because that's a way to ingrain yourself. And it becomes, you know, like, I feel like America's made all this progress trying to root out these hardcore institutional racists from like, you know, very 50s, 60s style. But that's what some of these kids seem to want, and that's what they're trying to implement. And the other thing, and this is where I lead into this, they've created a social maze that's almost impossible to trace unless you're invited to become one of them. And it almost sounds like, you know, like a thriller novel, right? Where you stumble into this underground racist movement that it turns out is in the halls of power, raising millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, and a social maze that you literally have to be in the system of theirs to get it. Do you ever feel like you know, stumbled on something way bigger than you ever imagined when you?
So when I was at CPAC, I went to this event that was held by a group called Republicans for National Renewal. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, Paul Gosar, and Laura Loomer were speaking at it. And while I was there, this guy looked so disheveled. He asked for my phone number. His name was Shane Trejo, and I gave him my number. That is in the story. This is not in the story. This had to get cut. I mean, the original story was like 12,000 words, and the one day you got to just 4,400. So like 2-3 weeks later, he messages me and he's like, "Hey, you're in DC. Do you want to meet up with our contact in the Hungarian embassy? He's going to train you to recruit MAGAs into the America First caucus. Gosar and Green are already on board." And I had to be like, sure, who, can I have any information? And I'm like texting this journalist I know, his name is Luke O'Brien. He does like, he did a profile on Andrew Anglin that was in the Atlantic. So he's like covered, like this is his beat. And I was like, hey, if the guy is not American, do you think that that's a crime if I go talk to him about this? And he's like, yeah, you got to figure out if this is an American or not. It turned out it was. So I was able to go meet with him because I'm like, I don't know. Would they kill me? Like, how does this work? You know, what is the punishment for treason?
Right.
So yeah, so that, I mean, just out of the gate, just being like our contact in the Hungarian embassy, and we've already got these multiple people on board for this congressional caucus. Like, yeah, that is not what I thought I was signing up for. You know, I thought I was just going to record some people saying some crazy stuff, you know, at like the private receptions. I did not expect that was going to be.
Right. You didn't expect international related plans for geopolitical change from the right. You're like, oh, I thought you were just going to say some ignorant racist stuff and it'd be funny. I didn't expect to deal with like the Hungarian contact and deal with a foreign country's foreign leaders. Like, this is like Mission Impossible gone awry. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So on that note, I remember reading that part about the guy, and then that same guy like asked you out, correct? Or was hitting on you?
He well, many times he asked if he could come hang out in my hotel room.
Right.
No, the answer was no.
For sure.
No. Later, he did. I had surgery on my arm because I broke my arm, and he told me to let him know when my drugs were off so he could hit on me again. And I thought that was actually a really nice display of understanding consent. So hats off to Shane.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, actually, that perfectly leads into my next question. And when I'm reading about this, it's interesting how you mention it. Like, you know, you just sort of showed up to these events and no one really asked any questions. You know, and the part of that got me curious about this is right. Like, in my notes, I have it as a two-tiered system. Like, one, I'm worried about young men and being trapped in the manosphere and what that kind of attitude leads to, where you get the staffers you've met. So I guess question one is, when it comes to men, are you surprised by the attitudes that some of the men have in this? And then the second tier is more so, since you're a woman and you're in that field, you've talked to other women like Laura Loomer and Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm curious, from your perspective, from while you were there, what was the role that like women had? Did you see a lot of them there? Were they in positions of leadership? Do you feel like they're as bought into the message too? Or am I overthinking it? It's more so just a bunch of young dudes trapped in the manosphere trying to make this happen.
So I was not really surprised by the men, because men could be like creepy and weird and awful no matter their political ideology. It doesn't really matter. And also, like, my job was, you know, I was a woman who like talked about pickup trucks and sports cars for a living. So like, whatever, I've already dealt with everything. I found, so I never approach people. I always let people approach me. I would sit at the bar, like basically wait for men to hit on me. And in retrospect, something I did not realize, man, this is like such a tangent, but maybe a year after I was done being undercover, there was a space on Twitter, and it was a bunch of right-wing women talking about like various men that have assaulted them or just been pigs on the right. And listening to the conversation, I was like, I'm really glad I never bothered trying to get in with women, because I would have felt a kinship with this kind of discussion in a way that I never felt a kinship with the men, because I always knew they never viewed me as like a full person. And that's something that I think that women can tend to be able to bond over, no matter what your background is, class, you know, race, doesn't matter. I think when it comes to, I remember something that was very strange. At Turning Point USA, I went to like maybe 3 speeches, and one of them was Lauren Boebert. She gave a really bizarre speech that was like, women shouldn't work, they should have a bunch of kids, but also I'm working, but I also have kids, and I'm going to retire and take care of and it's just like, bro, either you don't know what you want or you're lying. When it comes to women who in what I would say is like the actual Nazi movement, and this might be controversial, and I'm not like an expert, but my read on it has been, obviously if you grow up in it or it happens when you're a teenager, it's one thing, but adult women who go into these very, very extreme movements, I find they are often doing it for a man. You know, and that's some internal issue on their end, confidence issue, loneliness, it's something, and they are following a man. And I find that they are like, I don't damaged might not be the right word, but even as they try to leave, I just see patterns in them that I don't see in the men. Where it's like, I think because with the men, it's like you have to undo the Nazi stuff, you have to undo the racism stuff. But with the women, you have to undo all of that. But then you also have to undo like this issue that instead of making you turn to like a woman white power movement or create a woman white power movement, you also have to figure out like what made you susceptible to following this guy, which is different than what makes you susceptible to becoming a Nazi, right? Like it's an extra step you have to do. And so I don't know. I think some of them are just younger, and you know, it's a lot of like, and we had this in libertarian movement, a lot of like pick-me's, where you're like, oh, I'm not like other girls, you know. I think a lot of them probably start off like that, but you know, if you're over 25, there is a lot more to unpack with you than I'm capable of doing. I would say too, with some of the younger ones, I went to one event with, it was American Populist Union. And after they had an event on Hitler's birthday, they had to change their name to American Virtue. And there were women there. There were not many. One of them, I mean, they were very rude to the women, the younger women who were there, the ones who were their age, like early 20s. They were very rude to them, but they were there and they were supportive, just not too many of them.
Wow. That's very fascinating. And it's interesting that you say that, because I almost had this kind of same suspicion based on the way I've seen it. And I mean, I remember not too long ago on Fox News, if it was on The Five or Jesse Waters, whichever one of those guys was making the joke, and they were showing like the way the political leanings are now, and it's like college educated single women are like plus 36 Dem. And they're like, well, that's the problem with everyone, is that we need to get these gals married. And it's like, that's what you see. It's like, no, we don't need to encourage single women to want to vote for us for any reason. We just need them married so their husbands can tell them what to do. And it's like, I didn't necessarily think that that was still in vogue, but yeah, from what it sounds like, what you're saying, and if I trail it through, you know, some of the younger women who've been at these, like the Turning Point girls I've talked to, all the way through the Moms for Liberty, that is kind of there, right? There's that thorough line of, they may buy into the patriarchy because it's, you know, in some way, shape, or fashion worked for them and been able to shape their worldview. And I'm just surprised with the men. Again, with the men, I'm not shocked, right? I just figured it was just a lot of dudes all chasing around, seeing the 5 women that are there, and they're all trying to compete to sleep with whoever they think the most attractive one is. But, you know, and I feel like it's a joke on my end. It's like, if a lot of these kids got laid, they would chill out and like be like, you know what? I don't really need to be a Nazi. Like, I just kind of like hanging out with girls and drinking beer and stuff. I don't have to be crazy like Nick Fuentes, like an incel. And I'm worried that, you know, that his version of these online dudes who are really into it, and they're just so hyped up on, you know, I got to be a man, I got to be an alpha, I got to be pro-Trump and pro. And this is the other thing that kills me. Is like, they want to say like, you know, what is a woman? We're defending women from the transgender menace that's erasing you guys. But at the same time, they don't treat you like an equal when you show up and you give every impression that you care, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like they'll ever grow out of it, or is it just like I don't know, they're backlashing against Me Too and the patriarchal structures that for long they feel like they are entitled to, even if it was at the detriment of other people?
I think some of them will grow out of it. I mean, obviously, I think the ones whose names you're known are gonna probably not grow out of it, even if they wanted to. They're kind of stuck. But I think it was something that the Trump movement did, was created a community in a way that like politicians don't usually do. And I mean, leaving libertarianism was really hard for me. It was like a huge part of my identity, and it took me years to really like kind of wash my hands of it. And that was with me being like, hey guys, there's Nazis in our party, and people being like, we're not leftists, we don't say Nazis. And I'm like, well, that guy just gave a Hitler salute. I think he's a Nazi. And, you know, having to like fight that. And then after, you know, before I was out, like by the time, you know, Trump was elected, so by Charlottesville, I was like, hey, remember these libertarians that are now marching in Charlottesville? Like, come on. And I think, you know, my journey leaving, even with all of that stuff, was very hard. And I would play trivia with, you know, the libertarians that I like lived around. We would go out drinking together. They were my friends. And instead of like doing that around a political party, Trump created this world where those things were happening around him. And the culture was so toxic. And I think maybe if you were just going to be like a little anti-Semitic and like a little racist, but you were going to like, I don't know, work at the Best Buy or something, and it was never going to super matter. You know, I mean, it's not good, but it's not like you're not making a congressional caucus. But I think that Trump created this atmosphere where you were able to really fixate on the Jews, and you were really able to fixate on minorities and the grievances that you felt with the world, and everyone around you in your social circle was saying like, it's because of these people, it's because of this. And I think it created something that became larger. Like, so maybe people would have been more passively racist, and it just became a fixation of theirs due to their social circumstances, and created complete monsters.
It's very real. I agree with everything you said there. It's so accurate. And on that note, a little bit back though, but going to, this is a quote from Shane Trejo. This has made me laugh when I hear it. He said, quote, Trump has really changed things in Michigan. He told me as I scanned the room for anyone who looked important, like all the hardcore Trump people are now in positions of power. I'm the district chair. Leader of the Trump Republicans is the co-chair of the party, and we're really seizing that power of the GOP. So I don't know if you follow the Michigan GOP at all, but it went from 2014, right, when I feel like the world was normal and we were all living normal lives. They had control of like the governor's mansion and the both house of the assembly, and they were, competent people who they didn't like everything everybody did, right for work, all the old 2010 Republican stuff that we used to like and now we don't anymore. That was all the rage. And then Trump comes into power, and guess what happens, right? The entire state, the backlash is so big. You now have 4 Democratic women running all the executive branches. They control both houses, and the Republicans are having fist fights at meetings, breaking dentures, and now they have like 50 grand in the bank. So even if they're quote unquote, and this is what kills me, right? Like I listen to conservative radio, not because I really enjoy it, but because many clients that I work for do. And like they're convinced that they're winning, like even though they're literally losing. And they interview these people like, yeah, so what's your big plan for the Michigan GOP? Like, yeah, what are your plans? Because you have $10. How are you going to win the state back with $10? And it's like, because of that kind of insular nature, and since I think a combination of like small donors since Citizens United and the internet allowing them to atomize themselves, they can just convince themselves that if something bad happened, it's because, the rhinos and the leftists did it and all the bad people did it. And excuse me, we'll get them next time. And it's like, no, the country is fundamentally shifting away from you on a large scale. And you keep standing behind this man. Like even today, the conservative show I was listening to was quoting swing state polling, which again, is troubling that Donald Trump is still polling anywhere close to Joe Biden. But again, it's like they'll only talk about that, but they'll never mention, hey, 60% of the country thinks Trump is an actual criminal who deserves to go to prison for the crimes that we all gladly agree he committed because we watched it on television. And then that leads me to the next thing. So, seeing your picture when you were at January 6th, 2021, correct?
I was.
You didn't go into the Capitol, obviously, but you were there.
I wanted to. I wanted to. My friend is a journalist, and he was like, "You're not going in."
I was like, "Well, you would have theoretically been covered, right? If you, I mean, it may have blown your cover, but you would have been like, I'm actually a journalist working undercover, or you could have gone full MAGA, been like, I'm going to court. I'm going to be in prison with the J6ers. Really deep dive in there. I would have respected you for that, but I totally understand why you did. What was it like there, right? Because like I know when you talked previously leading up from 2020, you talked about how scary it was, and to me it was like I get it, right? I heard them all laughing, but I thought like they're all just super pissed because presidents don't normally lose re-election, but Trump did for many obvious reasons, and they're really mad. They just thought they would get it, but you know what? They'll get over it. And then it didn't stop. Like Parler kept posting up, Facebook groups kept posting up, stop the steal. This is happening. We're taking the country back. And it's like, what was it like being at the epicenter of all that? Because I watched TV and I was livid. And I was like, I'm normally not a police should beat people up, but I was at the TV yelling, take the badges off and start smashing heads. Because I'm sick of watching these people try to take my country away. So, but that's just me. I don't want to get too mad. What was it like for you?
It was crazy. So at the December 2020 Stop the Steal rally, I just remember this woman telling me a story. She was like, yeah, I was here in November and now I'm back and it's getting more dangerous and it's more terrible. And she's like, I almost got beat up for being a Trump supporter like last night. And I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. Like what happened? And she's like, well, I was walking on the street, my phone was dead, and 2 guys came running up to me and they passed by me. And I was like, okay. And she's like, yeah. And I go, okay, where's the rest of the story? And but she was so passionate about it. And then that night after the rally was over, everybody was out in the streets and people were getting stabbed. And it was a lot of just this like incredible level of paranoia. And I was obsessed with it. I kept telling all of my friends, I'm like, this is messed up. Like something's going to go down. And that was, independent of like, you've got people on like the Donald.win, like posting like, here's what you have to buy so you can poop in buckets, camp out in front of the camera, like whatever. So like those things made it worse. But having my actual experience on the ground was like really what made me worried. And then on the 6th, there was just so much hate. I mean, like when you go to these Black Lives Matter marches, or when I've been to them, it's not, people are angry, but there's also people there who are like, like actually leading prayer circles and like talking about ways to better their community and stuff like that. You have like kind of a mix of everything. But at January 6th, everybody was just so mad. I've never been around so much hate in my life. Everybody who wasn't one of us was one of them. And it was, like shocking, because the only thing a cop said to me all day was, if you're going to go up to the Capitol, can you please not walk on the sidewalk? We're trying to make way for a stranger. And I'm like, okay, I'll cut through the grass. Thank you, ma'am. Whereas in June 2020, I went to literally one Black Lives Matter march in all of 2020. And it's the one where Trump had us all tear gas to hold a Bible upside down. And I'm like,
Wow.
This is just like night and day. When in 2014, when we would do these BLM marches, they would say where to meet, and then nobody would post the location on Twitter because they didn't want the cops. Like the cops would bring out snowplows in the summertime and shut down entire roads just because they thought that we might march over there, and they didn't want tourists to see us. And meanwhile, they're just like literally rolling over for these people. And as we were marching forward, there's like old ladies and like little kids. And Proud Boys are coming out of the Capitol, and they've got, out of the crowd, because we couldn't see if people were in or not. And they're tear gassed, and it's like a medical emergency. Everybody's back up. And then like, we're still marching forward. And it's, why are we not concerned about whatever made this guy look like that? I'm concerned, Right. And then they had their shofars because they were going to, do the Jericho march and march around. And then I guess the building was going to fall down, everybody was going to die, and Trump was going to be president or whatever they were going for. And so in my audio from it, it's just like all of this like screaming hate, and then like shofars blowing like every like minute and a half. And when we were leaving at some point, so I ran into somebody I knew from Mother Jones who told me not to go inside. And when we left, he was saying like, we're leaving. We're not war correspondents. This is ridiculous. We got to get out of here. We were walking away, and I was in a shirt. I don't know if I can swear, but it was like, no, I was not wearing a swear shirt. I was wearing Biden, not my president. I also had an F. Joe Biden hat.
I was going to say, please swear. My podcasts are all explicit, so by all means, go ahead, unload if you feel like it.
Yeah, I went with all the anti-Biden stuff instead of the pro-Trump gear when I was undercover, because I was like, I can't. Smart. That's a line I can't cross. Yeah.
Smart.
And there was like a woman, and she was walking toward the Capitol, and she was in all black, bulletproof vest, and a black hat, and she had press written down her leg, written down her arm, and I mean, she was like NPR or something. And people were like, "That's Antifa. That's Antifa." And I'm just like, "Oh my God, you guys are deranged!" Like, that's just what press looks like in a war scene, which is what you have made it here.
Right.
Yeah. And like the next day, I lived behind the Capitol, and I was out by the Supreme Court, and this guy walked past. He was obviously like one of my neighbors, though I did not know him. And he was like, "You guys are fucking traitors. You're fucking traitors." And everybody lost their minds. They're like, "Just go back to China if that's how you feel. You can live in communist China." And it's like, you just tried to overthrow the election like yesterday.
Right.
What?
Like, did you not forget about the coup that happened like 22 hours ago? Because you were there.
You're still in your shirt.
Like,
you're still in the shirt.
Like, you're literally in the I'm at the coup shirt, like talking about the coup. Like, we almost did the coup, guys. How cool was that coup?
And don't forget, there was a merch tent at January 6th, because that's where I got my neat Biden, not my president t-shirt, was at the J6 merch tent. Yeah.
For sure. Those merch people, man, I know a lot of them weren't Trump people, but they knew that people would buy those shirts anyway. So I got
my guy was. My guy was. He came from
100%.
Kentucky. He had a whole business going on. He was a real dedicated guy.
That's awesome. Good for him. I'm glad he was able to make some money off of it and maybe make some cool clothes along the way. That is just Since then, because I keep thinking since January 6th, like we really haven't had, I was really concerned. I mean, you look back to the 2010s when you have like the Bundys taking over federal institutions out west. And, that combined with the previous militia movements from the 90s, which have all kind of morphed into what we're dealing with today. January 6th could have been way worse on so many different levels if they had come, if they had decided just to bring guns anyway and thought they could open fire on the police. I mean, it would have been way worse than it was. And it scares me to think that, I grew up in America and I was like, we had the 2000 election, but since then everything's been kind of okay. And it's like, nope, in 2021, I watched a coup happen on live television from the man who runs my party, who I technically worked for when I worked for the federal government for the census. And it's a very mind-blowing experience to be like, I lived through that. I watched a, granted, not successfully well thought out, but still the boldness to attempt in any way coup, of which, the former president's now facing 91 felony charges. So I guess to kind of keep it closer to where we're at nowadays, do you still, since the piece has come out and you've been, I guess, burned would be the word, has everyone stopped contacting you or trusting you in any way, shape, or form? Do you still have people who you can reach out to, or are you basically now just fielding offers between the Washington Post and New York Times?
Oh God, my Twitter account is so unprofessional. It's so funny. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, everybody I met undercover me. Actually, when I got doxxed, there was like a QAnon conference I was supposed to be at that weekend, and they were like giving speeches about how terrible I was. Pretty funny.
Wow.
Something that it did do was I really got under people's skin, and it's made it easier. There's like this weird thing where like media on the left is really weird about the undercover stuff, like really weird. But people on the right are not weird about it ever. I mean, it's pretty rare. I mean, if I swindled your friend, you're mad at me. But I think it's like the Project Veritas culture on the right has made it so that people will literally talk to me. Like, right, people on the right will talk to me about the people I write about now. And they're always like, yo, yeah, the undercover thing, it's cool. It's really cool. It's real journalism, like in a way that staff journalism is not. And I've always thought that's very interesting. So no, nobody that I knew will talk to me, but it has kind of helped me get sources on the right, which is great for me.
Excellent. Having sources is always a plus. Do you know anyone from the J6 riot who's been incarcerated? Or have any of your friends, were any of them caught up in that? I say friends, people you met while you were there. Were any of them caught up in that?
None of them were arrested. No, I don't think any of them went inside with my guess.
They were smart enough to stay away from that because probably knowing full well how it's going to go down. So that's understandable. So I guess from here, I want to ask you, what's the future look like for you? You've gone from, struggling to get gigs in 2020 to having the hottest journalism story of the year. What's next for you? What are your plans going forward?
Well, I'm writing a memoir, but I guess as far as journalism, like I'm kind of stuck in this young Republican beat now. I think that's where I'll keep writing. Some of the real lunatics that are in the Young Republican organization, who really, really are not fans of my work at all. They're the ones that I'll keep writing about.
But they're still following you and still talking, right? And they're still talking trash. Even though they could have blocked you and cut away. Exactly. I think in a way,
even in person.
I feel like in a way they crave the combat, right? And with you, it's even worse because you were a friend and a confidant and someone they thought they could trust. Even if I don't really think they thought that, they're just like, oh, a girl's interested. Let's do this. Come on in. And it turned out you did talk to them and be friends. And now they're like, wow, I can't believe she would have done that. It's more like, no, it's not me that's the problem here and all the crazy things I say in private that I, won't defend in public or know will make me look bad. It's the fact that you expose me that makes me the problem. That makes you the problem. And that's what real undercover journalism or undercover work is, right? You expose the truth, the harsh, ugly truth that comes from this. And a lot of these guys will say things like, as you mentioned before, they're like, beat those Jamaicans' asses, and then in public, they're like, oh, everybody be nice. Let's not hurt anybody. Let's right? It's a
Yeah.
very, we're all tough talk until an actual conflict can arise, and then they know that A, they probably will get their asses beat, and B, it may not go down the way they think it will. So excellent.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah,
memoir,
Gavin Wax did say that I was very pale and quiet and scared when he confronted me in Dallas when the article came out. We were both at the Young Republican National Convention, and I just posted the audio of him and me where I did not sound like I was probably pale or scared. And he sounded really upset, really emotional. It's like, why are you lying when I have this audio because you saw me recording you as you started screaming at me? Like, so yeah,
exactly.
it is
Very good at projection. Yeah. Like when they say Jack Smith looks deranged when he's announcing charges, when Trump's the one sweating and yelling everywhere, and Jack Smith is as sober as a prosecutor could possibly be, announcing serious federal charges. So the projection is very strong in all of them. Well, Amanda, I don't want to keep too much of your time. I know you're busy. You got a lot going on, but I do want to thank you for coming on to the podcast and listening. And, I think for my listeners out there, I know mostly in those GEP circles, but, for the left leaners out there, this reminds me there's a chance you can go and learn about people. And one of the most, and I won't go on a tangent, but the most popular podcast I have in my collection, which isn't a lot, doesn't have a lot of views. It's just me walking into a Trump rally by my apartment and interviewing people. It was in October of 2020 when Trump had just gotten COVID. And, frankly, it's very kind of like a Channel 5-y. I just, hey, what do you think? And then I let them talk. And I learned a lot from that. And, there's people who said stuff I vehemently disagreed with, people who I could relate to a little bit. There were counter protesters, not as many, but they didn't have to be. It's Illinois. Most of the state hates Trump by a large margin anyway, so not a big deal there. But you do meet these people, and they seem like besides this, I would maybe eat dinner with them and hang out, and not in a non-political sense. You'd have a great time, but the politics are just so toxic. It's like, how can you say like, oh, I teach Sunday school, and also Joe Biden is a pedophile and needs to be executed in the same sentence? And it's like not a single bit of cognitive dissonance. It kills me.
Yeah.
So, Amanda, if you could do one favor for me, for my GOP audience out there that may be skeptical of the things you've said, or they don't want to read your writing, or they feel like they don't trust the media in general, what would you say to people? Because I know you can relate to their background. What would you say to people if they feel skeptical about your reporting, and they feel skeptical about, the problems within this movement in general?
I would say definitely take the time to at least start the longer piece of the nation. Because it's like I said, I writing about these people on the right, I'm really 100% relying on Republicans who are either disgusted with MAGA and Trumpism. And I don't mean necessarily with people who support Trump, but with what the MAGA ethos embodies, the loud, brash, rude assholes who are trying to take over the party. I write for a left-wing audience and a left-wing paycheck, but I also understand in my writing that if anything's going to be done about these people, it has to appeal to people on the right. I can't essentially take cheap shots or things. I can't say things that will alienate the right in a way that will make them look down on my writing. So I'm not a fan of Republicanism, so it's not like my writing is biased or it's not neutral in that regard. But if I say something, I mean it. When I call someone a Nazi, it's because they've praised Hitler. It's very direct like that. And I have dozens of people who are willing to talk to me after spending months and months reading my writing, and a lot of that is the way I present information and the way I back up what I say. And so I think it is a testament to kind of what I am trying to do here, which is expose the rot on the right in a way. I mean, a lot of it is entertaining. I don't necessarily mean positive entertaining, but some guy telling me he wants to turn the country into a friendlier Nazi Germany, that's salacious and people want to read that. But at the same time, also providing enough information that if you want to do something about it, you can. because of course that's not my job. That is the right's job. That's y'all's job to get rid of these people.
Excellent. Couldn't have said it better myself. Amanda Moore, thank you so much for joining the NotoriousSA podcast, and thanks to all the listeners out there for listening in today. And I hope you all learned something, and you have a great day.